In a room full of genius, no one noticed the woman scrubbing trays. They laughed when she dared to speak, dismissed her when she suggested a solution. But the next morning, they walked into room 2C and froze, because 5 quiet lines on a whiteboard just shattered years of academic ego, and the one who wrote them was the woman they never once looked in the eye. Before we dive into this unbelievable true story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It helps us tell more stories that the world tries to silence, and gives voice to those who were never meant to disappear. The cafeteria at Wellington University was always loud, too loud for thoughts, too loud for silence, clattering trays, steam from industrial coffee machines, and the dull roar of students late to class created a background hum of organized chaos. But beneath that noise, moving with a rhythm as steady as the heartbeat of the building itself, was Miss Evelyn. She wore a plain white apron that had faded slightly with time and scrubbing. Her gray-streaked hair was always tucked neatly beneath a net. Her sneakers, once navy blue, had long since dulled into anonymity. So had her presence. No one knew her last name. No one asked. She was the lady who refilled ketchup bottles, who picked up abandoned napkins, who whispered, "Have a nice day," even when no one replied. She moved like a ghost with purpose. This morning, Evelyn arrived early 6:52. Mom. The sky outside still tinted with pre-dawn mist. She adjusted her apron in the locker room with robotic familiarity. Same steps, same sequence. Every day for the last 11 years. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and offered a small, quiet nod. Time to disappear again, she whispered to herself. But that day, something was already different, and it started at table 14, the corner claimed by the math department every morning like clockwork. They were there again, 5 of them, faces buried in thick academic journals and coffee cups still steaming. Evelyn didn't intend to eavesdrop. She never did, but years of being invisible had given her one powerful tool. She'd become an expert at listening, the kind of listening that saw through words and into patterns, the kind mathematicians would kill to possess. But they never noticed her long enough to realize that, even if you shift the base parameter, the model fails by the 3rd phase cycle, said a sharp voice female, confident. Dr. Lena Moore, Evelyn recalled, the only black professor on the faculty. Brilliant. Overworked, often interrupted. You're miscalculating the decay rate, replied another, this one deeper. Older. Impatient. Professor Brent Wallace, department head. Nobel shortlisted. A man whose intellect was only rivaled by his arrogance. Evelyn was near the sink when she paused, plate in hand, listening closer. Another voice chimed in quieter, more uncertain. What if we're approaching the vector from the wrong axis altogether? The table went quiet for a beat, then Wallace laughed. That's like saying gravity bends backward if you squint hard enough. Evelyn's lips parted. She blinked, her brain already working. She didn't mean to think about it. But the equation they kept saying parts of it aloud. And somehow, even though it had been decades since she'd stood at a blackboard, it felt like an old friend knocking on her memory. Her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for a rag to wipe the counter. Words slipped from her lips before she could catch them. If the output vector is unstable, couldn't you just redefine the limit boundaries in R4? Silence. 5 heads turned. Wallace looked up, confusion creasing his forehead. I'm sorry, what did you say? He asked slowly, more curious than kind. Evelyn froze, rag clenched tightly. Nothing. Sir, I was just talking to myself. He raised an eyebrow. R4. Huh. A pause. Then a smirk curled across his lips like smoke. Well, he said, loud enough for others nearby to hear. Looks like our lunch lady's been brushing up on quantum vector fields. A couple of the others chuckled. Not cruel, just dismissive. Casual disrespect. Dr. Moore didn't laugh. Her eyes stayed fixed on Evelyn, studying her, but she said nothing. Evelyn nodded politely and turned back toward the kitchen. But inside her heart raced. Her cheeks burned, not with embarrassment, but with something older, deeper. A memory she hadn't touched in years began to surface. In that one moment, with a smirk and a laugh, The world had reminded her, "You work in the kitchen. Stay there." She kept scrubbing, but her knuckles turned white. She didn't know it yet, but that quiet murmur she had spoken was about to become the loudest voice in the university. That night, the hum of Evelyn's apartment was as quiet as her thoughts were loud. Her space was small, one bedroom, one bathroom, old heater that rattled in winter. The kitchen tiles were chipped, the faucet dripped sometimes, and her couch had more memory than cushion. But it was hers. It was also the only place where Evelyn could think without being told she shouldn't. She sat at the table, still in her kitchen whites. The lights above flickered slightly before stabilizing. In front of her, wrapped in a faded silk scarf, was something sacred. A spiral-bound notebook, edges worn, corners curled, the sticker on the front barely readable. MIT, class of '84. She hadn't opened it in years. Not since her mother passed, but today, something had shifted. That smug little laugh from Wallace, the way they all looked through her, the weight of being erased over and over, it was all pounding now, not in anger, but in urgency. She untied the scarf and opened the notebook. The handwriting inside was precise, elegant. Page after page of mathematical theories, vector explorations, handwritten derivations. To most, it looked like chaos. To Evelyn, it was music. It was home. She turned to a blank page, stared for a moment, then slowly picked up a pen. The equation the professors argued over wasn't foreign. She didn't know the name they called it now. Probably something with a Latin root and a hyphen, but the bones of it were familiar. She'd seen something like it during her undergrad years. Something buried in nonlinear entropy correction models. It was wrong then. Still wrong now. But close. So damn close. She started writing, slowly at first, then faster. With every line, the room got quieter, not physically but in her mind. The doubt, the hesitation, the years of silence all dulled by the sound of ink on paper. By the time she stopped, the first draft of the solution was there, messy, incomplete, but promising. Evelyn leaned back, staring at it. A long breath escaped her. Then the memories returned. 35 years ago, she'd stood at a podium in Vienna, a 24-year-old prodigy with a voice shaking through the mic. Hundreds of scholars had filled the room to hear her present a new approach to multidimensional vector symmetries, and she had dazzled them. Back then, her name mattered, but within months, that world had changed. Her mother's diagnosis had hit like a storm. Alzheimer's. Rapid onset. Her father had already passed 2 winters prior. There was no one else. Evelyn didn't even think twice. She packed her apartment, wrote to MIT, and declined the postdoctoral offer to Princeton. "I'll be back in a year," she had told herself. She never returned. Now, she traced the edge of that same notebook. So many missed chances, so many unspoken thoughts, and yet the math never left her. A soft knock startled her. It was her neighbor's son, Tariq, a sophomore at Wellington, engineering major. Quiet, kind. He often helped her carry groceries up the stairs. "Miss Evelyn," he said, holding a textbook. "I'm sorry to bother you this late. You ever good with partial derivatives? I'm kinda lost." She blinked, caught between decades. Then she smiled. "Come in, baby. Let's see what you're stuck on." And just like that, without titles, without applause, Evelyn Booker taught again. The next morning, she arrived at the cafeteria at 6:58. Yeah. 2 minutes later than usual. Not that anyone noticed. The staff room smelled of powdered detergent and burnt toast. She tied her apron, tucked in her hairnet, and breathed in. But this time, something felt different. She wasn't just walking into a job. She was walking in with an answer. And by the end of the day, the university would never look at her the same again. By mid-afternoon, the cafeteria was less chaotic. Students had retreated to classes, leaving behind scattered trays, half-eaten sandwiches, and cold fries. Evelyn worked quietly, methodically wiping down the ketchup-stained tables. But her attention wasn't really on the job. She kept glancing at table 14. The math professors were still there. Papers spread out, equations scrawled across open notebooks, voices sharper now tense. Dr. Wallace sat at the center like a captain navigating a sinking ship. his tone growing more impatient by the minute. "We've wasted 3 weeks on this cycle theory," he snapped. "It doesn't hold, not even on simulation, but it does up to the 4th iteration," argued Dr. Moore, pushing up her glasses. "The drop-off happens after that because of a misaligned assumption in the boundary condition. I ran it again last night." Wallace scoffed. "Maybe you ran it wrong." That jab didn't land quietly. Moore stiffened, lips pressed tight. Evelyn noticed, from behind the counter. She could only hear bits and pieces, but it was enough. The same equation, the same stuck point, and she knew, absolutely knew, that she could help. But should she? They'd mocked her once. They didn't want her help. They wanted her invisible. Still, something pulled her forward. She approached. Slowly, carrying a dish bin as cover, she stopped just within earshot, pretending to tidy. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I think you're assuming a boundary discontinuity that doesn't exist." All heads turned. Wallace looked up first, his irritation already lit. "Excuse me." Evelyn held his stare for a moment. Her pulse thudded hard in her ears, but her face remained calm. "If you reparameterize the outer limit as a soft boundary and decouple the tertiary input loop, you'll see the divergence vanishes. The error only appears when the algorithm forces convergence too early." Silence. Stun. Absolute silence. Moore looked stunned. Another professor dropped his pen, but Wallace leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and let out a dry laugh. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "You're suggesting we adjust the core structure of a model peer-reviewed by Caltech and Oxford, because the cafeteria lady says so." A few nervous chuckles followed. One professor looked down. "Uncomfortable." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I'm not suggesting anything," she said evenly. "I'm offering an observation." Wallace's eyes narrowed. "Well, maybe next time you should stick to offering extra ketchup packets." That line landed like a slap. Evelyn stared at him, her hands tightening around the dish bin. Her knuckles turned white again. Before she could speak, Dr. Moore stood up. "Brent," she said sharply. "That's enough." Wallace glanced at her. "Come on, Lena. You're really going to take this seriously." "I am," she said, her voice cool. "Because she's right. I've run the same simulation 3 times. That boundary issue never made sense. What she just said, that would explain it." Another beat of silence. Then Wallace chuckled again, but this time with less certainty. "Well, if our department starts taking algorithm advice from kitchen staff, maybe we deserve to be laughed out of the next journal." Dr. Moore's voice dropped low. "Maybe we deserve worse." She turned to Evelyn, her expression calm but burning with something deeper respect. "What's your name?" Evelyn hesitated. She hadn't said her name out loud to anyone here in years, but she stood a little taller now. "Evelyn," she said. "Evelyn Booker." Moore nodded. "Thank you, Evelyn." Wallace pushed back from the table. "This is absurd." But even as he walked away, Evelyn noticed something. One of the younger professors had started copying down what she'd said. For the first time in 11 years, someone at that table had written her words. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The street outside buzzed faintly with late buses and neon hum. But inside, her apartment was still, filled only with the quiet sound of her flipping notebook pages. She stared at the proof she'd sketched the night before and thought back to Wallace's voice. "Maybe you should stick to ketchup packets." Her jaw clenched. She hadn't asked to be noticed. She wasn't seeking applause. But dismissal that cut deep. Not because of pride, but because of everything she had sacrificed, everything they never saw. She pulled her chair closer to the table, flipped the page, and began working again. This time, she wasn't just revising, she was rewriting. She didn't just want to understand the solution. She wanted to own it, prove it, on paper, with elegance. By the time the sun cracked the edge of the sky, Evelyn had filled 6 new pages. No scratched-out lines, no hesitations, just clean, tight logic. She wasn't guessing. She knew. At 5:45 a.m. Evelyn walked across the quiet campus. The dew on the grass sparkled under the first morning light. She passed statues of long-dead founders and plaques commemorating scholars who would never have noticed her. She didn't stop. She knew exactly where she was going. The mathematics building. Room 2C. It was unlocked. It always was. Professors used it for early meetings, study sessions, guest lectures. No one would be there this early. Not even the janitor. Evelyn stepped inside. The room smelled like chalk dust and old carpet. A whiteboard stretched across the front wall. Beside it, a small tray of dry erase markers. She picked up the blue one, her favorite color, and stared at the blank space in front of her. She paused only once. Then, with a steady hand, Evelyn wrote, Line 1, reframed constraint model. Line 2, boundary decoupling function. Line 3, vector inversion in nonlinear R4 space. Line 4, entropic loss correction. Line 5, final solution. 5 lines. 5 perfect, logical, irreversible lines. No fluff, no showmanship, just clarity. She stepped back, looked at the board for a long moment, and then she smiled, a small smile, the kind that said, I remember who I am. She placed her marker back on the ledge, tucked her notebook under her arm, and left the room as silently as she had entered. At 7:12 May. Professor Brent Wallace arrived at room 2C. He pushed open the door with a tired grunt, a coffee in one hand, a folder in the other. He wasn't expecting anything, just another dead-end morning, but as the door creaked open, he froze. There on the board were 5 lines. He blinked once, twice. The coffee cup tipped slightly in his hand. A few drops splashed onto his shoe. What the hell? He dropped his folder and stepped forward. Each line was precise, elegant, impossible. By the time the second professor entered the room, Wallace hadn't moved an inch. Is that? The new arrival asked, staring wide-eyed at the board. Wallace didn't answer. He was too busy whispering something under his breath, barely audible. No way. Within the hour, word spread. Dr. Kim arrived. Then Morales. Then 2 teaching assistants. By 8:30, there were 6 people crammed shoulder to shoulder in room 2C, staring at the board like it was some divine revelation. This isn't guesswork, said Kim. This is publishable, said Morales. But who the hell wrote it? Nobody had a clue. And that's when one of the TAs, curious, skeptical, pulled up the building's security footage. They fast-forwarded through the early hours. Empty halls, cleaning staff. Then, at 5:46, My Sabam. A small figure entered through the side door. A woman, white uniform, hairnet, a notebook in her arms. The video was grainy, but unmistakable. Wait, Morales said, leaning in. Is that Miss Evelyn? Kim whispered. Wallace said nothing. The woman they all ignored had just left a room full of PhDs speechless. The reaction spread like wildfire. By lunchtime, the math department was abuzz with whispers. Professors debated by the vending machines, grad students hovered around the photocopier whispering theories, and students sat in stunned circles on the quad, refreshing Twitter and Reddit threads. The viral post read simply, Newton Hayes anomaly cracked at Wellington. 5-line solution. No name. Who did this? Room 2C. Unknown genius. Within minutes, someone posted a grainy screenshot of the board, then a zoomed-in still from the security footage. Then came the theories. Was it a visiting scholar? A prank by a prodigy? An AI testing ground? An elaborate social experiment? And then, someone recognized her. A sophomore named Janice posted a photo from the cafeteria. That's her. I see her every morning refilling the salt shakers. Her name tag says Evelyn. The comment exploded. Wait, she's the lunch lady. No one believed it at first, but more students chimed in. She helped me once with a calc proof. She corrected something in my notes quietly. I thought she was just being nice. I didn't realize. In less than 2 hours, Who is Miss Evelyn was trending locally. By 3:00 May, the university president had received 3 formal press requests, 5 media inquiries, and 1 anonymous call from a national research institute asking to speak to the person responsible. But no one had actually spoken to Evelyn. Back in the cafeteria, Evelyn was wiping a table near the soda machine, her expression calm, her body moving as it always did, quiet, invisible. But everything around her had changed. Students watched her now, not with indifference, but with curiosity, respect, guilt. Professors passed her and faltered mid-step. Whispers followed her like a ripple in still water. She pretended not to notice. Until Dr. Moore appeared. She walked straight up to Evelyn, gently tapped the table, and said, "Can we talk?" Evelyn nodded once, wiped her hands on her apron, and followed her into a small break room at the back of the kitchen. They stood alone. Moore sat first. "That was you," she said softly. Evelyn didn't reply. "I knew it when I saw the entropy correction line. It wasn't just correct, it was elegant. No student could have done that." Still, Evelyn said nothing. Dr. Moore leaned forward. "You know they're going to come asking. The press, the university. Wallace is already spinning it as a hoax." That finally drew Evelyn's eyes. "He's what?" Moore nodded grimly. "He doesn't want to believe it. Doesn't want to accept that the woman he mocked yesterday did what he couldn't in 3 years." A pause. "Tell me something," Moore asked. "Why now?" Evelyn stared down at her hands. "Because I remembered who I was." Moore waited. "For a long time, I told myself it didn't matter, that I was okay being invisible, that the past was over." But then he laughed. She looked up, and it wasn't just a laugh. It was a message. "You don't belong here." And I realized. "They've been telling me that for years." Moore's eyes glistened. Evelyn's voice remained even. "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because the math deserved better than them." Then Moore asked the question that had been circling everyone's minds. "Who are you?" "Evelyn." The answer came quietly. "My name is Evelyn Louise Booker, MIT class of 1984. I was the youngest black woman to present at the Global Mathematical Symposium that year." And then I walked away. Moore's breath caught in her throat. Evelyn stood. "I don't want press. I don't want cameras. But I do want one thing." Moore leaned in. "When they ask who solved the Newton-Hayes anomaly," Evelyn said, her voice steel and silk, "you look them in the eye and say, 'The woman you never bothered to ask.'" By morning, Evelyn's name wasn't just known. It was reverberating. Emails flooded the math department. Journalists camped outside the faculty building. Students created posters reading "Ask Evelyn," taped them beside statues of dead white men with plaques boasting father of theoretical insight. Meanwhile, Wallace. He was unraveling. At first, he dismissed it a fluke, a fraud. Then the department ran verification models. All correct, every line, every outcome. The board was erased now, but not before it had been photographed, analyzed, and simulated in 7 separate software systems. The solution held. What Wallace couldn't stomach wasn't the fact that it had been solved, it was who had solved it. He marched into the dean's office, voice raised. "You can't possibly let this stand. She's not faculty. She's not even published. We don't know if she plagiarized." The dean raised a hand. "We reviewed the footage. Brent, we pulled her employment file. We interviewed her former professors. Evelyn Booker isn't a fraud. She's a mathematician. And frankly, she's the first real one this university's seen in years." Wallace froze. The dean leaned back in his chair. "You laughed at her. I'd start writing your apology now." Down in the cafeteria, Evelyn arrived like she always did. 58, maybe. Apron tied tight, quiet steps, but the room wasn't the same. Students stood when she walked in. No one spoke. They just rose. Some clapped, some lowered their heads. Some simply watched her with tears in their eyes. At the far end of the room, a young black woman freshman, maybe approached slowly. "Miss Evelyn," she said, her voice shaking. "You're the reason I haven't dropped out yet." Evelyn blinked, stunned. "I didn't think people like me could ever be the smartest person in the room." And with that, she hugged Evelyn, tightly. It wasn't a polite hug. It was the kind you give to someone who saved you, who made space for you just by existing. That afternoon, the university held a closed-door meeting. Evelyn had declined multiple requests to speak. She didn't want a press conference, but she agreed one meeting. Her terms: no cameras, no recordings, no reporters, just 3 professors, and they had to listen. Inside a quiet faculty lounge, Dr. Morales, Dr. Kim, and Wallace sat waiting. The tension was thick. Evelyn entered in her white kitchen shirt, the old MIT notebook in her hand. No makeup, no suit, just presence. She sat across from them, notebook resting gently on the table like a sacred text. Morales spoke first. "We're sorry. Truly. What you did, what we didn't see, it was extraordinary." Kim nodded. "We didn't ask. We assumed, and that's on us." Wallace said nothing. His eyes were tired, jaw locked. Evelyn didn't speak right away. She looked at all 3 of them, slowly, fully. Then she said, "I don't need your apologies." A pause. "I need you to change." She opened the notebook and pushed it toward the center. "I need you to stop building systems where people like me can't breathe, where brilliance has to hide behind serving trays, where silence is the only way to survive." Her voice was steady. "I'm not asking for awards. I'm not asking for my name in lights. I just want to make sure the next Evelyn doesn't disappear." Morales blinked back tears. Evelyn stood. "One more thing," she said, pausing at the door. "You're not the smartest people in the room just because you have the degrees. Intelligence without humility, that's just noise." Then she left. And for once, Wallace didn't have a word to say. The next day, Evelyn arrived at the cafeteria right on time. But today, she didn't bring her apron. She brought something else, a folded letter, sealed in a university envelope, handed to her that morning by the dean's assistant. It was an official invitation. The university wanted her to guest lecture. No time limit, no topic restriction, no strings. At first, she almost tore it in half. She didn't need their stage to validate her. She'd already proven everything she had to prove with 5 lines and a blue marker. But then, she remembered the look in that freshman girl's eyes. The fear, the awe, the hunger. And Evelyn realized this wasn't about her anymore. 3 days later, the university auditorium was full, packed to the walls. Faculty, students, janitors, kitchen staff, everyone came. Even those who had never set foot in a lecture hall before. The university president was seated in the front row. Professors lined the aisles. But there was no fanfare, no music, no spotlight, just a hush. And then Evelyn walked out. She wore a deep navy dress and simple flats. In her hands, the same MIT notebook. The audience rose. The applause wasn't wild. It was slow, deep, earned. She approached the podium, adjusted the mic. Then, for a moment, she simply looked at them. When she spoke, her voice was calm, unshaken. "Good afternoon. My name is Evelyn Louise Booker. Some of you know me as the woman who served your coffee. Some of you never noticed me at all." A ripple moved through the audience. She continued, unfazed. "For over a decade, I cleaned your tables, picked up your trash, and listened while you solved problems I'd already solved in my head. Scattered murmurs again, some guilty, some stunned. I don't need you to apologize for the years you looked through me. What I need is for you to understand what it means to be invisible in a place that claims to search for brilliance." She paused, then held up her notebook. "This," she said, "is where my voice lived when the world wouldn't let me speak." She turned to the last page. "You know these 5 lines. You praised them. You called them genius." She looked back at the crowd. "But they aren't genius because I wrote them. They're genius because you refused to see who could." Dead silence. You talk about logic, theory, systems, but you don't even realize when your own systems are broken. She lowered the notebook. "I'm not here to teach math today. I'm here to teach humility. Because knowledge without empathy is just elitism in a cap and gown." She took a breath, looked around. "And if you remember anything from today, remember this. Brilliance doesn't ask for permission to exist. It just does, whether you see it or not." Then she nodded once, softly, and walked away. The entire room stood again, this time not in awe, but in reverence. There were no dry eye. After the lecture, The university felt different, not on paper, not in official statements, but in energy. The faculty lounge grew quieter when Evelyn passed. Students started pausing before tossing trays, offering eye contact, thank yous, quiet smiles. Subtle, but real. The whispers had become witness. And then came the next surprise. The university announced a new annual award, the Evelyn Booker Fellowship for Hidden Excellence. It was more than a scholarship. It was a statement, a promise to find, honor, and listen to the minds too often buried under assumption. Photos of Evelyn began appearing around campus, not the viral screen caps, but real ones. A young Evelyn in a lecture hall. Evelyn receiving her MIT honors. Evelyn laughing beside her mother on a park bench. But one photo stood above all the rest. At the center of the cafeteria wall, newly painted and spotlit, hung a portrait. Evelyn in her kitchen uniform, standing proudly, holding her spiral notebook. Below it, engraved in gold, knowledge is knowing. Wisdom is listening. Evelyn L. Booker. The staff cried when they saw it. Some of them had worked beside Evelyn for years and never knew her story. Some were immigrants. Some had once been professors, engineers, thinkers in their own countries. Now they saw themselves reflected in her, and for the first time, the world saw them too. Evelyn didn't stop working in the cafeteria, even after the fame, even after the fellowship, even after being offered a formal teaching position, visiting professor. Advanced Theoretical Mathematics. She accepted that title, but kept the white shirt. When asked why, she smiled gently. It's comfortable, she said, and it reminds me where I come from. But now, her name tag read both title, Evelyn L. Booker, kitchen staff and visiting professor. She refused to let the world erase either. One morning, as she was restocking the napkin dispensers, a nervous freshman approached, a black girl, no older than 18, glasses slipping down her nose, a notebook hugged tightly to her chest. Miss Evelyn, she said, voice shaking, I watched your talk, and I wrote something, a theory, but I don't know if it makes any sense. Evelyn didn't interrupt. She just gestured to the table. Let's sit. The girl placed her notebook down and opened it. Inside scribbled diagrams, half-finished equations, loops of uncertainty, but there was heart in every line. Evelyn nodded. She tapped the top of the page where it read, Page 1. You see this right here, she said. This is the most important number. 1. The girl looked confused. Evelyn smiled. It's not the perfect equation. It's not the flawless result. It's the first step. The first time you dared to believe you might be right. That's how it always starts. The girl blinked back tears, and for the first time in her young life, believed she could belong. Sometimes, Brilliance wears a lab coat, sometimes a lecture badge, and sometimes an apron. Evelyn didn't just solve an equation. She solved a culture of ignorance, and proved that true wisdom isn't loud, it listens. So the next time you pass someone without looking, ask yourself, how many Evelyns have you already ignored? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on that bell, because the next voice we share might be the one the world forgot to hear.